I am Dr. Beverly Reed,
And I'm Dr. Amber Klimczak.
and we are Two
Two
Peaks
peaks
in
in
a
a pod.
Pod. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are very excited today because we have our very second guest appearance. We have Dr. Erica Bove that is here joining us today. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, I am so very honored to be here with you guys. I adore you. I adore the work you're doing, and I'm just so happy to be here.
Yes, and we are just so happy to have you. We think the world of you. So, Dr. Bove is a fertility physician. And first, I just wanted to say, where can everybody find you? I know you're all over social media. I follow you, but I want everybody else to follow you too. So, where can they find you?
Yes, so the best place is my website, especially if you're interested in what I do and potentially working with me. That's loveandsciencefertility.com. And then
Love that
I have
name. That's so
yes,
fun.
thank you. I always say that with my embryo transfers, and so I'm like, why would I not, make this the name of my coaching practice? And then I'm also on Facebook, so Love and Science Fertility. I'm on Instagram, same name, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So yes, find me any of those places.
That's right. People can find you. Okay, and then so you're a fertility physician. And so I just wanted to know a little bit more about what made you want to be a fertility doctor.
Great question. And I would love to know your stories too, because I know we all have one. So I actually went to med school to be a psychiatrist.
Oh, so
Isn't
interesting.
that
Love
so
that.
interesting? And I wanted to
Yes.
cure the world of eating disorders. That was my goal, which is kind of interesting because we do some of that in REI,
Yes,
Mhm.
that's true.
But I've always loved like the human element of medicine.
Mhm.
And what I didn't realize is that I also love working with my hands and solving very actionable problems, right? And
Yeah.
so when I got to my psychiatry rotation in medical school, I was like, I love this a lot, but it's kind of slow. It's like not my pace. But then
Mhm.
when I did my OBGYN rotation, it was like there wasn't even a clock. Like I was so engaged in the work. I loved the meaningful aspect, even if it was like GYN oncology or, high risk OB, like any of those things. I mean, fertility grabbed me the most, but I was like, this is the coolest work in the entire world. Like you affect, people, families, matriarchs. Like it was just amazing. And so that's when I was like, had a heart to heart with myself. And I was like, maybe I need to reconsider my plans. And so I kind of stacked my fourth year with OBGYN rotations and infertility, and I just fell in love with it. And I felt like not only am I accessing the secrets of the universe every single day, in the lab, but I'm also able to use science in a way that has such a meaningful impact on my life and on their lives, excuse me, and my life too, because I get to be a part of it. But and the ups and the downs and the humanness of it all, I found the psychiatry, the psychology I needed within that. And to partner with my more advanced psychiatric colleagues was something that was more of my calling than to be a psychiatrist.
Amazing. And
Amazing.
I can only imagine that when you see your doctor, it's great that they have some kind of background and interest in that. I've actually heard the term commonly gynechiatrist
Yes.
instead of psychiatrist, and I'm like, yes, that makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
that's right. That's right.
So, how did you then transition into also doing fertility coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I found coaching from a personal perspective, and I loved how it helped me shine a light on my thoughts and my feelings. And this is something that I was not ever taught, in any of my education was like how we show up in the world is actually a result of our thoughts and our feelings, which then we can choose how we want it to be different, right? And so when I was, looking for help with parenting, when I was looking for help with relationships, coaching showed me skills that I had never seen before. And then I started to think to myself, I do this every single day with my patients. Like I help to guide them. What if I started to apply the coaching techniques and the principles to help my patients make these big decisions, right? And in the mindset, and especially when times get tough, as we all know they do a lot of times in the fertility journey. So I started to kind of just experiment a little bit. And I was like, this is super powerful. Like my patients are actually having an easier time making these decisions when I help them tap into their inner wisdom. So that's when I decided to do like an actual program. And I found Brooke Castillo's The Life Coach School, which is this prestigious life coach school. I took
Yeah.
like night classes and tuition and paid tuition and all these things. And it was super fun and it was super useful. And
Mhm.
so then I was like, you know what? I think I want to help people with fertility in a coaching format, right? So I got the idea to form the group called Love and Science Thriving Through Infertility. And now I have clients and we have one on one meetings and we have group meetings and everything. And it's just been such a wonderful way to really empower people who want additional support beyond what can happen, in the office setting to partner with their REIs along their journey.
Absolutely. Well, that's amazing. I'm a big fan of Castillo as well. I listen to her podcast, and it's just been so helpful for just life in general to reframe certain situations with your thoughts and everything. So I think that's a great idea to apply that to the fertility world. So I wanted to get your thoughts on a situation. With our podcast format, a lot of times we like to talk about recent celebrity news or celebrity clips or things like that. So I was going to share a recent one that I saw with you and see if you've seen these things come up and how we can maybe help our patients. So I watched this show called Paris in Love. Okay, this is a show about Paris Hilton. And I actually have really enjoyed season 2 of Paris in Love because it really features her journey with fertility. Now, it doesn't kind of give you all the details. I'm not exactly sure why she, was doing IVF, but it shows different things like her giving IVF injections. She uses a gestational carrier to have both of her children. So I just find it really fascinating. But I saw a really painful part of the episode that stood out to me, which is her mother was undergoing an interview, and I guess somebody from the media asked her, when is Paris having kids? This is before she had kids. And her mother tells the world, well, she's really struggling with fertility. She's really trying to get pregnant right now. Okay. So Paris sees this and is like, why is my mom telling the world this? Right. It's so just honestly, it was embarrassing for her. She was not open about these things. And actually, in her case, it wasn't even true because the truth to it is that her gestational carrier was pregnant. She was not struggling at that point. But so she had that happen and it made all the newspaper articles and everything. And then Paris goes to a holiday party at her mom's house. And after somebody had seen all these articles, the very first question they ask Paris when they see her, are you pregnant yet?
Oh my
Can you
goodness.
even imagine the
No.
insensitivity of being at, a public party there and people knowing, because it's everywhere in the media, that you're potentially struggling and then to have that question. So,
Yeah.
but I just thought it was so relatable because, gosh, this is happening to Paris Hilton, but this is happening to all my patients too, right? Have you seen this happen? And what's a good way to answer that?
I'm so glad you brought this up. And I mean, as I see patients in December, I see patients and I see clients, so I do both, right? And so as
Mhm.
I see, patients and clients, I can just feel the anxiety rising as we get closer to
Mhm.
the holidays.
Definitely.
And I think, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? There's grief because many times we had hoped that this had happened already or sooner, or that we might be able to share certain news at a certain time. Other times it's more fear about what other people might say or ask and what do we say. And so I'm so glad you brought this up because I'm sure that you have listeners who are trying to get pregnant right now. Absolutely. And I would also imagine that you have a lot of listeners who either are going to family functions unaware of what their family members are going through, or they even maybe even know somebody who's going through it and just they don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing I would offer is if you are going to any sort of a function, I try to say always or never, but I will say in this situation, never ask about someone's fertility or family building plans unless they bring it up themselves first. Because just like it wasn't her mother's story to tell, like the
Yeah.
fertility journey, that is a person's own very private story to tell. And if they
Yeah.
choose to tell that story, then, that may be an
Mhm.
opportunity to offer support or, sort of meet them where they are. But it's never our question. It's never our story. It's their story. And so to give them that space and honor that boundary, I think is really, really important. And so that's if you don't know. If you do know someone is struggling, and it depends on your relationship with them, of course, but I might ask them ahead of time, like,
Mhm.
hey, I know you and your husband have been going through fertility treatments. I just want to know how I can support you the most during this time. Like,
Love that.
do you wanna
Mhm.
talk about it? Do you not wanna talk about it? I'm here for
Yeah.
you. Let me know how I can be. Because then so much of infertility feels like an out of control experience, right? It's like I
Yes.
lose my agency. I'm going to all these appointments. Like, I can't control the outcome always. And so I think if we put our people who are so dear to us in the driver's seat and say, "How can I support you? You tell me. Do you want me to
Yes.
check in? Do you wanna be the one
Mhm.
to reach out?" Then when we actually see them in real life at the party, it's not like, "Does she have a glass of wine or not? Like, what's going on?"
Yes.
All these, like, stories. It's like we've already sort of thought ahead of time of how that
Yeah.
interaction would go.
Yeah. And I do want to say too, like for the people who may be listening who've asked these questions, I know it's not because you're a bad person, right?
Mhm.
I mean, because here's the thing, I've asked these questions before I got into fertility and knew about this. When I was in
Mhm.
college and everything, I used to be nosy and ask these questions. But I do think it comes from a good place. If it's your friend, you want to connect with your friend and you want to know what's going on with them and all the rest of it. So it's not that it comes from a bad place, but then as you learn more about fertility, you just realize you need to have more sensitivity to that issue because you just never know what somebody is going through at that time. And so I like how a lot of people are trying to spread awareness that fertility is not small talk. If you want to connect with somebody, you can talk about the weather, you can talk
Mhm.
about sports or reality shows or whatever. It doesn't have to be fertility as that way of connecting.
That's right. Thank you so much for saying that. And I think that's such a good point that if you're a listener and you've asked these questions before, as I have too, right?
Yeah.
It's like we give ourselves grace. It comes from a place of care and concern. There's just other ways to be able to show that concern and, be able to show our people love at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think too, that's one of the things we're trying to do is spread a lot of awareness around
Mhm.
holidays too, just to say for people who follow our accounts who don't even think about it, just realize that, we may have just diagnosed somebody with a miscarriage the day before Christmas,
Right.
or we may have diagnosed somebody, with infertility that they didn't know that they had before. And so just kind of realizing that somebody may be doing or undergoing something like that, but put a smile on their face and dress up and look nice,
Mhm.
and so I think it's just helpful to always be thinking about that and
That's
realize
right.
that they may not want to go to a huge family function and tell everybody everything that's happening.
Right.
That's right. And I also wanted to mention this is the holiday season in terms of the winter holidays, but I think this
Yeah,
also applies to other times. It feels like there's always a holiday, right? That brings up
yeah.
these big thoughts and feelings like
Yes.
Mother's Day, Father's Day, like
Yeah.
all these different times can be very triggering for people. So just being sensitive now, absolutely, it's on our radar, but being sensitive throughout the whole year, I think is really important too.
I think such a good point because ones that I didn't realize before that were triggering as well are back to school, right? Your social media is filled with photos of kids
Mhm.
and Halloween, your social media.
Yes.
And so it was really helpful for me to learn from patients that those times can be really hard for them too.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
You mentioned a very particular situation that I do feel like comes up a lot, and
Hmm.
it came up for me, and that is like if you go to one of these parties and perhaps you're opting to not have a beverage, right? You don't want to have a
Ah,
glass of wine for
mhm,
whatever reason. I feel like that also is always something. Oh,
mhm,
she's not drinking. Oh, she must
mhm,
be pregnant. And so,
mhm.
also, I think you just have to be careful because people don't drink for a lot of reasons during the
Yeah, that's
holidays.
true.
But I did have that happen to me when I was on call one
Yeah.
time. I couldn't drink and I was struggling to get pregnant, but I
Hmm.
had some friends that were like, oh, you must be pregnant,
Hmm.
and underneath it all, you're just
Yeah.
like, oh. So,
Yes,
there's lots of
absolutely.
reasons why someone might not drink at a holiday party. So,
Right. And even separate from that too, some people do have, alcohol addiction or
Mhm.
dependence issues, right? And they may not want to open up about that too. So that's probably another question that is not very
Right.
sensitive to ask
But I feel
people.
like I don't know about y'all, but
Yeah.
I feel like it comes up
Oh,
all the time.
all the time for
All
sure.
the
Because
time.
yeah, I mean, I've shared this before. I actually don't drink alcohol anymore just as a health choice. I mean, alcohol does cause 7 different types of cancer, at least, right? So to me, it's almost like if somebody says they're not a smoker, people don't say, "Well, why aren't you a smoker?" Like it's obvious to us, right? But
Right.
I do get the question all the time. In fact, I usually just fake drinking wherever I go. I just get a mocktail so people don't ask me. So I think that's a good point too. That there's probably multiple related things besides
Mhm.
just asking about fertility that can be triggering for our patients as well. Hmm.
That's right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I will say too, just here's another example that I had. This wasn't holiday related, but it always makes me feel bad when I think about it. Is I had a patient. who was in the waiting room, and she was very young. And another one of my patients, who was kind of more traditionally aged for fertility, was there. And apparently, that patient looked at her and said, "Well, you look too young to be here at a fertility clinic. You're too young. Why are you even here?" Okay. And the patient just kind of smiled and didn't say anything. But she got back for the ultrasound and she was really upset because you know what? She didn't have infertility. She was there because her daughter had passed away from a genetic disease and she was ready for another child and she was going to do genetic testing so that this wouldn't happen again. And so, another example, you never know what somebody is going through and you just have to be really,
So
really
hard.
sensitive to
Yeah.
those issues too.
That's right. Thank you
Um,
so much for bringing that up.
yeah, but and then one other thing too that I've learned as a fertility doctor is, I've loved to give advice. It's what I do, right? And so if I do know somebody who's having some kind of fertility issues, I think when I was younger and less experienced, I kind of wanted to, well, let me give you, but no, like you should only give advice, right? If somebody's asking you for
Mhm.
advice,
That's right.
because that might be really stressful to somebody if they have a great doctor already who's giving them great advice. And then what if I tell them something different from that? It doesn't mean that one doctor is right or wrong, but that's going to create stress and conflict for the patient too. So even I feel like I struggle with it sometimes too. I've just learned I don't offer anything unless I'm asked.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's right. And one thing I wanted to say is a lot of my patients and clients come to me and say, "Oh, this person in my life said, 'Oh, you just need to relax. Oh, you just need to take a vacation.'" I mean, that's like one of the most common things that I hear. And
Mhm.
it's like
Mhm.
that just compounds, even though, like you said before, it's coming from a very well-meaning place. Like, we study for 10 bajillion years to do this work. And there's so many reasons. If it was just relaxing and taking a vacation, we would not even have a job? So I think just kind of like reminding people that maybe if they, didn't have any fertility issues themselves and didn't feel stressed at the time, like that's not always the best advice for other people.
Yes. Yeah.
And Dr. Bove, what can our patients learn from you in the fertility coaching world? Of what sort of tools can they bring with them to maybe these holiday parties or
Mhm.
experiences with their family? What can they be armed with to sort of
Yes.
maybe support themselves and not feel so caught off guard?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I will quote, we always quote our senior residents, right? And so when I was an intern, my third year resident, Sari Pont, said, be prepared, right? Two
Mhm.
words, be
Yeah.
prepared. You know
Mhm.
the questions are coming. You know
Yeah.
it. And
Mhm.
nosy Aunt Sue is going to ask that question. And so even though we encourage people, not to bring it up, people
Yes.
often do. And so
Yeah.
just whether it's humor or whether it's sort of we're working on it. I'd really prefer not to talk about it right now. I'll let you know when we have some news to share. Like whatever
Mhm.
your way of addressing it's going to be, know what that is so that you're not
Mhm.
caught off guard. So then again, you're in the driver's seat of how you want to respond to that. I think that that's the first thing is to be prepared. The second thing is to really contain the social media because, even like the holiday cards, I look at the holiday cards, which I adore, but
Yeah.
it's like the 5% of people's lives that they want to be putting out
Yeah.
there in the world,
For
right? It's not
sure.
like the mac
Yeah.
and cheese on the ground or the, car accident the previous day. Like it's what everybody filters through. And so I love social media. I just think that we have to approach it with caution and either contain it significantly or cut it out altogether. And I know
Mhm.
there's pluses and minuses of both, but I always say, like, there are data that after we leave social media, we feel more anxious and depressed than before we got on. And there's a
Wow.
reason for that because it's that comparison like, oh, like her dress is prettier than mine. Oh,
Yeah.
looks like her marriage is better than mine. Like, whatever it is, we are just constantly wired to compare. And
Yeah.
so just going into that with that mindset, either I'm going to do it for 15 minutes to like see what my friends are up to, and then I'm going to be off and I'm going to do something to fill my well. I think that
Mhm.
that's, approach social media with caution is my second, pearl.
Mhm.
um, the third thing is to do the things which bring you joy. So if for you that's a run or a yoga class or
Mhm.
listening to music or going for a walk in nature, whatever it is, like we all know that there's things that fill our wells and our buckets. And so having a list of those things, doing those things every day will allow for more resilience in these difficult situations. Right. And, you can even decide not to go to holiday parties. I mean, that's totally
Yeah.
acceptable. I think there
Mhm.
are people, if it's a baby shower or something, around this time, it's people just say, it's too much for me. And that's okay too.
Yeah.
But just be honest with yourself and nurture yourself during this
Mhm.
time because then it will help to buffer some of the harder things. So that's my third piece of advice. And, my fourth is to have your inner circle. So we all know that there's
Mhm.
people that we love and we trust. We can't have
Yeah.
too many of those people. Otherwise, it's just reinventing ourselves all the time. But, we have our best friend, we have our sister, we have our maybe a partner, we have these people in our lives who know us, they don't judge us, they love us. And so having, infertility can be so isolating. Having those people close to us, near and dear at hand, whether it's a text or a call, I think that's our village for weathering this storm. And so that's what I would say. My four pieces of advice. Number one, be prepared. Number two, really contain the social media or be off it altogether. Number three, do the things which bring you joy on a daily basis if possible. And then number four is to really have and cultivate your inner circle.
Those are
Amazing.
great.
Yeah.
Dr. Bove, I wanted to ask you one other question because full transparency, when these things would happen to me, sometimes I would be a little rude and just have to shut someone down. So, do you have any just canned phrases that our patients could use to respond that maybe don't sound rude, especially to an older relative that clearly isn't listening to podcasts about how to be respectful? Do you have anything that you would recommend we
Well,
say?
before she says that, I just don't believe that
Oh,
you
totally.
are even
Definitely.
capable of being rude. Like, I've
Definitely.
literally never seen you be rude to anybody. So
No.
I feel like
Some people
maybe
have to be
you thought you
shut.
were
No,
being
they
rude.
have to be shut down.
Do you remember any of the things you might have said? Like, do you remember?
Oh gosh, just anything to make them stop talking. Basically,
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's just not
I
good.
think
I've heard
sometimes
some good ones. So
what
I'll
have
tell
you
you some
heard?
good
Let's talk
ones.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard some good
Yeah,
ones,
tell
which
me.
is like, especially if it's like an older conservative
Mm-hmm.
person, try to give like a very kind of almost
Yes.
sexually
Yes.
exploitive answer, like, well, like, we do have sex 3 times a day, or like, to try to embarrass them, kind of, so
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that.
that's good.
But I will say too, I try to daydream up, like, I wish I was one of those people with like
Mhm.
really
Yeah,
zippy
I
witty
want like a
comebacks,
canned response
like a
that they
good,
can just
yeah.
like.
And I know I'm the personality type that I could never come up with something like 3 weeks later I'd be like, I should have said this. But I do like another one I heard, which is to say, wow, that's a really personal question. And then just silence
Yeah,
after.
that's
And I
good.
think that's a good one, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's not really funny necessarily,
yeah.
but it does put them on the spot of like, oh, okay.
That's right. I think you wanna kind of decide ahead of time if you wanna go with humor or, or something more serious. Like, I think sometimes, like, I've heard my patients have said, like, they're undergoing renovations, they're living with mom and dad. Well, maybe if I wasn't, living under mom and dad's roof, it would be a little easier
Yeah.
to be free with this stuff, So
Right.
that's kind of one
Right.
thing to say to maybe an older relative. Or I even heard recently, like, these people had a puppy, and the husband said, well, if my puppy didn't jump on my groin so many times a day, maybe we'd be having, maybe this would be happening a little faster. So, it's like it just kind of thinking up kind of what feels authentic, because I think anytime we feel
Yeah.
inauthentic, we feel
Yeah.
exhausted and drained. And, the fertility journey is already such a draining process as it is. So whatever we can say to be true to ourselves in a safe way, I think
Mhm.
that's the most important thing. But I love that idea. If you feel comfortable saying something, slightly sexual, to kind of like, mic drop,
Your grandmother.
Yeah, but I think it kind of goes back to one of your points about be prepared, right? I mean, it
Mhm.
is helpful to know you're going to potentially get these questions and then decide how you want to deal with it. And if you can, Google ahead of time some good witty comebacks
That's right. That's right. That's right.
if you don't want to share or anything like that. So yeah,
That's right. But I'm
absolutely.
like you. I'm like you, Dr. Reed. Like, it would take me like 3 weeks to come up with something witty. So
Dr. Bove, okay, I wanted to ask you a question not about fertility patients, but about fertility physicians. Okay, so
Mm,
from doing the job, being a fertility physician can be amazing. We feel the highest highs when we help a patient get pregnant. But what about when we don't get a patient pregnant that we really wanted to get pregnant? Or what if our patient miscarries and everything? We go through these really highs, but we go through a lot of low lows too. So I was curious, did you experience that? And have you found anything in your coaching journey that could help those of us who go through those
Yes,
things
we
too?
need some coaching on
We
this.
need
oh,
help.
yeah. I mean, I think it's so good that you asked this question. And I think that it's really important that we support each other, because there's nobody else that would understand this as well as another fertility physician who also, faces this day in and day out, the bad news and sort of the sadness that we grieve along with our patients, right? And so it's so great that you guys have each other because you can say, like, I had a
Yeah.
really hard day. 3 of my patients didn't get pregnant. And I was really hoping they would. I do
Yeah.
that with my colleagues. And I find that probably the most useful thing at this point in my career, just to kind of people who understand. And sometimes
Yes.
it's always hard, but I feel like sometimes it
Mhm.
clusters, and then that
Mhm.
weight of the serial bad news can be very crushing sometimes. And
Yeah.
so, similarly to what I said about, for my patients, I try to fill my own well to be able to
Yeah.
have more of a buffer for that. For me, regular exercise is a must, sleep is a must, eating good food is a must. Having my own tribe, I obviously never share patient details, but like, I had a really hard day today. And
Yeah.
that's very helpful. I think if anybody's listening and they suffer from what's called imposter syndrome, I think it's really helpful. That's something that coaching can very much address. And so, like, maybe when I was like a year out from my training, I would say, "Oh my gosh, like this person didn't get pregnant from their embryo transfer. If Dr. So and so
Mhm.
had done that transfer, it
Yeah.
probably would have worked." And then, then there's the personal blame, which is like in the judgment, which is the second arrow. We call it the second arrow. So it's not only the pain, but then it's the suffering because then we say, oh, well, if so and so had done it, then it would have worked. Which isn't, we know by the data, embryo transfers at best work 65% of the time. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we know that there's a statistical probability there, but I think when we over accept the burden, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
saying if there's a difficult transfer, we review it like a hawk and we say, okay,
Yeah.
what could have gone better? What could be done differently another time? Like all those things. But when
Yeah.
we excessively take that personal responsibility and have what we
Mhm.
call imposter syndrome, then we have to address that at the root because that just doesn't help
Yeah.
anybody, right? Like we suffer more, we're not as
Yeah.
present for our patients. And I think, and it's very isolating as well. So that's what
Yeah.
I would say. I do
And
help people with that all the time,
yeah.
colleagues and friends who are suffering in that way. And that is something that can definitely make it a lot better if that's part
Yeah.
of someone's
Well,
story.
and what I found, I think just in general, both on the patient and the physician side of things, is as women, we have a lot of self blame. So, for example, if a patient does an embryo transfer and it doesn't work, she blames herself. And then her female physician
Yeah.
probably also blames herself,
Mhm.
right? I don't see the same thing in the men. The men are usually like, it's your fault. Like,
Or
I
it's
mean,
the embryo. It's
yeah,
just,
like
something.
they, a lot of times the
Yeah.
guys like blame somebody else, right?
Yeah.
They never know, like, ever
Mhm.
self blame. But I just think that's interesting. But and like, for example, too, like if you had a patient that had a transfer didn't fail, I have no doubt in Dr. K. I know
Mhm.
she is the best physician I've ever worked with. So I'm just like, hey, I know it's not her fault that happened, right? But then when it's me, then I have that self doubt. I'm like,
Yes.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like what should
Mhm.
I have done? This should I have done
Mhm.
that? You really do, you know,
Yeah.
put a lot of pressure on yourself and all the rest of it. And I think in some ways it's good because we're always trying to make ourselves the very best for our patients. But also we probably need to give ourselves some grace too and say, look, we already did do the very best for our patient. And sometimes you just have to try again.
Right. That's right. And, especially for our more junior physicians, like trusting our training, and
Mhm.
trusting like, and just, believing in the statistical probabilities
Mhm.
and
Right.
understanding the numbers. I think depersonalizing a little bit in terms of just saying, well, statistically speaking, with the next transfer, it's going to be the successful. And if people stick with it,
Yeah.
they're going to be on the curve of success at
Yeah.
some point. Usually it's just trying to understand, remind ourselves, best case scenario, it's going to work
Yeah.
this percentage of the time and work through
Yes.
that. That's really helped me a lot.
Yeah. But I think too, yeah, just recognizing when let's say we get a negative pregnancy test on one of our patients, trying to make sure we're not making it mean something else than what it actually
Right.
is.
Yeah,
Just trying to
yeah.
frame those thoughts appropriately. And I also think too that one of the things I've learned over time is, we enjoy those moments so much when somebody's pregnant. We run into those moments and just want to stay in those moments forever. But it's important for us to embrace the negative pregnancy test too, because our first instinct is sometimes to run away. It's so uncomfortable. But if you allow yourself to be present in that moment, it's so important to be there for your patient and make a
That's right.
horrible experience tolerable and help them through it and coach them through it and everything too.
That's right.
And I think really, I don't think we think about this enough. That is probably the most important thing we do as fertility doctors is helping the patients that didn't get pregnant. or that had a miscarriage, you know?
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's
Something
where
that
I
I
think
learned.
that's
Oh,
why
go ahead.
go ahead, Dr. K.
No, I was just going to say from a different field that I had experience in, something I learned from an oncologist is just
Mhm.
allowing yourself to sit in silence with your patient.
Mm.
I think human beings in general hate to sit in silence, especially with
Yeah.
someone that maybe is not your partner or your, close family member. It makes you
Mm.
uncomfortable. But I do find like the negative pregnancy test, the failed transfers, like sometimes you just need to like be with your patient in the room in silence and let them process and get ready to say the next thing. I think the worst thing we can do is walk out of the room and then let
Yeah.
them be by themselves, or you're on the
Mhm.
phone with them. I'm sitting in silence a lot on the phone,
Yeah.
so it really has helped me, like, it's okay to be silent and let them respond at their time. So
Yeah.
That's right. And I think, as human beings, like there's that expression, that which we resist persists. And so, if we're like resisting the sadness or resisting the disappointment, then it's only going to grow within us and, either come out frankly in some sort of more pronounced way, or it's going to come out sideways in some different way with a partner or something else later. And so I think it's really important that we feel our feelings and that we grieve with our
Yeah.
patients. And
Mhm.
it's just the healthier way through, even though it feels more uncomfortable in the moment. I think it's honoring that moment, honoring that disappointment, and honoring our
Yeah.
commitment to that person to be there with them. Like, what is
Mhm.
compassion? Compassion is suffering with, right? And
Yeah.
so
Oh,
we
that's
we
powerful. Yep.
yeah, we're suffering with our patients, and that is also what then makes the joy of, I think
Mhm.
I'm joyful for all of my patients, but the people I've worked with for years and it finally takes and they finally have their baby, there's
Yeah.
something so very sweet about that. But it's only so joyful because we also know how hard and sad it's been in many ways. And
Mhm.
so that's what I
Yeah.
think. I think maybe we take the lens of compassion and figure out how we can also support each other at the same time.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful phrases I've heard is, "I'm not giving up on you," you
That's
know?
right.
And
That's right.
and 'cause sometimes people feel like that, they'll say, "Is this even realistic? Should I even come back for a follow-up appointment?" And I think it's just so powerful to let somebody know, "You know what? I'm not giving up on you."
Oh, that gives me chills. That really resonates
Yeah.
with me. I love that so much.
Yeah.
And, the other phrase I find super powerful is this is not your fault. I tell my
Right.
patients all the
Yeah.
time, especially with a
Yeah.
miscarriage or an like I tell them like, I know you know this, but I need to say out loud. And like I had a
Yeah.
miscarriage. My first pregnancy was a miscarriage. And when somebody said that to me, it
Yeah.
just took the weight away. So I've
Mhm.
that's been with me and
Yeah.
I like to share that with my patients too.
Yeah, so important, so important. Well, we just appreciate you so much. Thank you for
yes, thanks for
joining
joining
us as
us.
our second guest. This was very exciting, and I just feel like you have so much knowledge and advice. We would love to have you back on a future episode, maybe if you would be okay with that.
I
And
would
and thank
absolutely
you
love
so
that.
much.
Thank you
Yeah,
guys so
well,
much. This was so
great.
much fun, and I really do believe that it will help our listeners, both on the side of people who are patients and family members and friends, to navigate this holiday season,
Exactly.
with a little more tools in the toolkit. So yes, I would
Yes,
love to come
spread
back.
awareness and be prepared. So great. All right. Well,
Okay,
thank you
Thank you.
guys. Hope
Have a
everybody
good
has a great
week.
week. Bye.
thank you. Bye.